I wanted to welcome you all to the panel on the business of publishing. And just based on the number of people that are here today, who knew so many people were interested in the business of publishing? But it's really gratifying. And thank you all for coming. I'm sorry. Thank you. That better? Hi, my name is Mark Ouimet, and I work for Ingram Content Group, running a division called Ingram Publisher Services. And that business, in that business, I manage about 120 small and middle-sized publishers, and I help them run their business. And I'm here today to moderate this panel on the business of publishing. With us today, we have four giants in the world of books, and I'll start with the gentleman to my right. Mark Tauber is the Senior Vice President and publisher of HarperOne, a division of HarperCollins Publishers. Prior to joining HarperOne, Mark was co-founder and publisher of Everyday Health, Inc., and a founding member of BeliefNet, Inc. He began his career at Oxford University Press. He's published over 100 New York Times bestsellers by authors including Desmond Tutu, Dalai Lama, Barbara Brown, Taylor, Paul Coelho, Tina Selig, Johnny Cash, and so forth, Sidney Poitier. Mark was inducted into Books for a Better Life Hall of Fame in March 2015. Thanks for coming, Mark. Steve Wasserman, to his right, is currently editor-at-large for Yale University Press, and he's the former editor of the Los Angeles Times Book Review and a principal architect of the LA Times Festival of Books. He's a past editorial director of Times Books, was an imprint of Random House, and a former publisher and editorial director of Hill & Wang at Farrar, Straus & Giroux. He also worked as a literary agent representing, amongst others, Christopher Hitchens, Linda Ronstadt, Placido Domingo, and Robert Scheer. Thank you for coming. To his right is Ethan Nosowsky. Ethan is the editorial director at Graywolf Press. He began his career at Farrar, Straus & Giroux and has also been an editorial director at McSweeney's. He's edited books by Jeffrey Renard Allen, Hilton Isles, Kevin Barry, David Byrne, Vikram Chandra, Jeff Dyer, Dave Eggers, etc. He's taught in the creative writing program at Columbia University, has contributed to The Believer, Book Forum, the San Francisco Chronicle, and Three Penny Review. And he lives right here in Oakland. And David Streitfeld. David is a reporter for the New York Times who's been writing for 2 decades about the transition from a print-based culture to a digital one. In 2013, he was a member of the team that won the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory journalism. He's the editor of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The Last Interview, and Other Conversations, and a forthcoming book on Philip K. Dick. David lives with his family in Too Many Books in the East Bay here as well, where he's working on a literary history of the 1990s. Just a note about the publishing business. So I've been fortunate to have spent my entire working life in the business of books, whether in bookstores, in publishing companies, or in distribution, all while living in the Bay Area. So it's a great honor for me to be able to participate in this panel at the first ever and first annual Bay Area Book Festival. So here's a few things I've witnessed in my tenure in the publishing business. We've gone from a world with predominantly hardcover books to a world with trade and mass market paperbacks to formats like ebooks and other forms of digital content, which are really steadily occupying a central place in many readers' lives. Big publishers have gotten even bigger and consolidated down to a few multinational publishing conglomerates. We've gone from retail marketplace dominated by independent bookstores to one dominated by chain bookstores to one dominated by Amazon, and now we're seeing the rebirth of the independent bookstore. In short, while the publishing industry in one way or the other has brought us nearly every book at this festival, these examples just scratch the surface of the monumental change happening in publishing. The industry has undergone more significant change in the last 10 years than it probably did in the prior 100, and it's poised for even more growth in the next 10 years. So the four gentlemen that are up on the stage here with me today have sworn that they will tell the utmost truth about the secrets behind the publishing business, and I'd like to begin the questions. So this is a question for Steve Wasserman. Steve, how would you characterize the state of the publishing industry today? How do you think about publishing, and where do you think it's going?
Well, the only secret is that there are no secrets. And the real truth is that publishing isn't really a business. Or if it is a business, it's not really run by the businessman. Or if it is run by the businessman, they quickly get over their infatuation with the cultural workers who provide so much of what they deem to be the content. There's no question but that the ecology of book publication, of book selling, of the distribution of ideas in general has shifted and begun to change very radically. Of course, publishing has always been populated by people who love to complain and who insist that, in general, the glass is half empty, but lead their lives every morning waking up believing the glass to be half full. They have a kind of, the unsentimental approach is pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. It's also the case that those of us who have worked various stations in the publishing kitchen, and as you can see from this romp through my own resume, that it's hard for me to keep a steady job in one place for very long, and I seem determined to occupy virtually every station in that publishing kitchen before I'm done. What it has meant is that I, for one, have a more acute appreciation of how ideas and stories get generated in the culture, bubble up, and make their way among the general population. I do remain devoted to the idea that so long as the human species is defined by our opposable thumbs and our seemingly endless and obsessive need to tell each other stories, for it's that storytelling impetus that is the main way that we try to extract meaning from what is otherwise inchoate and even chaotic lives, that the making of books, or at least the telling of stories, however framed and sold they may be, will not soon die except with the extinction of our species. And in that sense, on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I remain an optimist. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm a pessimist. And on the weekends, I'm tortured by doubts, which is the main way I know that I'm an intellectual. I will say nothing that doesn't come as, that isn't a surprise to you. I mean, and probably there's some agreement on this panel, publishing today is in perpetual crisis. I don't share the general optimism, despite your assertion that independent stores are flourishing. In fact, I think that the number of independent stores are down from their historic highs, and to the extent that they're flourishing, is a sign of the general ill health of the industry as a whole, because what's happening with the disappearance of Borders, which took out 500 stores, I'll be surprised if Barnes & Noble, which had been the boogeyman of a decade or so ago, I'll be surprised if they are in business in 3 to 5 years. And that will be a major hit to the ways in which publishers even come up with first printings. Yes, some business will flow to independent stores, and that will be to the good, and some of the best of them will flourish. But in the main, we're undergoing a very radical shift, and the ways in which writers can find outlets for their stories, and the ways in which readers can absorb those stories, and what those consequences, both intended and unintended, will be for the general culture, all of those old assumptions are up for grabs. So in one sense, the Cassandras among us, and those of us who came of age in an earlier period, are sometimes hostage to a nostalgia for yesteryear. And on the other hand, there are many opportunities which imaginative souls and entrepreneurial spirits will take advantage of in ways that we can't currently predict, but which may actually improve the means and methods by which people absorb and embrace stories. Let me just say one more thing before I pass it on. No, I think I'll hold this for later. I think I've said enough, and we'll need to give my colleagues an opportunity as well.
Great. Thank you, Steve. David, I'd like to pose the same question to you. How would you characterize the state of the publishing industry today?
The golden age of publishing, I think, was always about 10 years ago when only good books were published, all the bad books were rejected, readers could find what they want. It's always an illusion, but we look back to the certainties of the past. Now, publishing seems to be doing well for the moment. The big publishers, their profits are up. How long that'll last seems somewhat unclear. Readers seem to be doing extremely well. They can find whatever they want, an abundance of material. They can find every book by their favorite author in whatever form they want. I think in the middle, there's more problems. The distribution of this material, the old ways of book selling are breaking down. The stores are disappearing. One company, Amazon, has 60%, a little more, of the digital and physical book market. That's an unprecedented level. And what it does with that is an open question. So readers are benefiting, publishers are benefiting, but as always, the future looks dark, and it always will. How people, there was an orderly system before where you could if you could get into the guild of the New York publishers, if your book was accepted, you had a reasonable chance of making an impact. Obviously, a lot of people weren't let in. The walls were really high. Now it is somewhat unclear how you will make an impact, who will decide whether you should be read, how, in essence, a book catches on. Maybe authors just need to be hustling themselves 60% of the time, 80% of the time, instead of actually writing. That's what the more successful ones do. So on most days, I'm confident that these problems will work their way out and that the abundance of books that we're all presented with every day, that the good ones will still be able to rise to the top.
Great, thank you. So question for Mark Tauber. Mark, what are the challenges you see now in publishing that you didn't see even 5 years ago? And what are exciting opportunities you see coming along as well?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. First of all, this is pretty awesome. Just to say, Mark and I were just chatting, and we were just at the big American industry event in New York a couple of weeks ago, and it was like sessions were not this crowded at the industry event. Like, there's people standing in the back. So cheers to you all. Nice job. Really, it's exciting and inspiring. Certainly for those of us in the business, that there are this many people interested. To answer your question, well, there's a lot of challenges. I am pretty optimistic. I mean, I think certainly there are troubles. There's no question there are troubles, but this is a 200-plus-year-old industry, and big ships don't turn quick, as they say. So we're slowly shifting, and I think speaking for myself, I am one of the big four publishers, and we are we're turning slowly, but I think we're adapting. In terms of the biggest challenges, I mean, there's so many I could speak to, but I would say the biggest one, and I come from what is mostly nonfiction publishing, so it's important to note that in the trade publishing space, and by trade we mean commercial, meaning the kind of stuff that you're going to hear on NPR, the kind of stuff you're going to see at the Barnes & Noble and at the major indies on tabletops, right? We're not talking about academic publishing, we're not talking about professional publishing, commercial trade publishing. And the biggest challenges for nonfiction, right, are that authors need to have, they've always needed to have what we call a platform. They can't just have written something brilliant and genius. Unfortunately, there's something like 400, well, listen, before self-publishing, there were 375,000 new books a year published in the United States every year alone. Who knows what it is now with self-publishing? But the point is that these platforms used to be that, so I've been speaking around the country, I have gotten some media attention, I maybe have a column in, People magazine, whatever it might be. It used to be that the way that we could break these authors out, and speaking particularly from the publishing point of view, as well, get them on the Today Show, or if can you get them on The View, or Terry Gross, if she'll sit down and do an interview with on Fresh Air, let's say, and name these others, Jon Stewart and the Daily Show and Colbert when he was. I mean, if you could get onto those shows, you were reasonably assured you're going to be able to break your book out. Now, it's not at all clear, because media has become so, over the last however many, 5 to 10 years, so spread out, right? it's not at all clear that an appearance on the Today Show or if Terry Gross does an hour with you that you're necessarily going to break your book out. So as a publisher, what we have to figure out, and when we're doing this on the front end, right, we're trying to figure out when you come to us, do you not only have a great book, well written, great idea, new idea, fresh, well done, but also what's your platform? Are you going to be able to, on the various social networks, right, be able to rally your fans? You may have hundreds of thousands of fans. Are they the kind of people that are responding to things? We as publishers, the biggest challenge, I would say, one of the biggest, among the biggest challenges, is being able to evaluate, like, what among the social platforms now of authors, and again, I'm speaking of nonfiction. This is not, we're not talking about Harper Lee and et cetera. We're talking, which is very exciting. The next book's coming soon. But what we're talking about is, like, how do we analyze it, evaluate, and say, how are they going to make the difference against the next person, the next writer? And that's become a really hard thing. We've had difficulties. We've made major bets. That means dollars that we've spent on advance against royalties with authors where it hasn't worked. We've also done very minimal spends with authors where all of a sudden their platform takes off. And I think we're still in an early period with social media where we don't know exactly how it's going to, in the long run, or even in the short term for us, you know, is it going to bump the books up to the next level? It used to be a very, I wouldn't say easy, but a very clear path to sales, bestsellerdom. Not so much anymore now. So that's my short answer.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. So this is a question for Ethan. So Ethan, small and medium-sized independent publishers seem to be thriving. Why do you think this is happening in the face of the biggest publishers getting bigger and more powerful?
Thank you. It is really great to see this huge crowd in the Bay Area. Thank you all for coming. Well, there are some very concrete things that happened in the last 10 or 15 years, probably the last 10 years especially, that made some room for the smaller presses, which is that as the economy got tougher, as a lot of independent bookstores started disappearing, as newspaper book reviews also disappeared. You know, it used to be when I started in publishing, a good literary book would come out and you'd have dozens of reviews from, the Kansas City Star and from the Tennessee newspapers, and there were small newspapers that had full book sections in every city in the country, and those aren't gone. The New York Times Book Review is now the last standalone book review in the country, and so getting people to discover. I know the Chronicle has it. You can't hear? Can you hear now? Okay, sorry. So the New York Times Book Review is the last kind of full standalone book review in the country, which isn't to say that other newspapers don't cover books, but they're in a much smaller way. So there was a while it was very hard to get attention for books that weren't obviously commercial, and a lot of the bigger publishers simply gave up on them and stopped taking risks on more literary work. This was a disaster for a little while. A lot of authors' advances went down. A lot of books that would have gotten published in the 1990s weren't getting published anymore. But the upside to that is it created room for energetic, smaller, and, there aren't really even mid-sized publishers anymore, but it made room for some energetic, smaller publishers to kind of seize some of that space. So, the books that we publish at Graywolf, for instance, or that, you can look at any number of, other great small presses and the couple of independent presses that are left from Grove or Norton, most of our books depend on reviews rather than advertising. And so we have to spend a lot of time getting the word out to booksellers, to people in stores that might talk about our books to customers, because fundamentally, most of you probably pick up a new book because somebody recommended it to you. Not, NPR is a great way to find out about books, but really fundamentally somebody has to recommend it to you. And some of that recommendation process starts in bookstores. So we start talking, a long time in advance. It takes a lot of time and legwork to sort of seed the field, I guess, before you can kind of harvest book sales once a book comes out. So, we sort of happily started publishing much better books than we'd been publishing, 15 years ago, simply because the bigger publishers weren't going to publish them, or conversely, they were going to pay so little for them, such small advances for them, and we rather strategically raised our advances slightly so that we could compete against the large publishers and often make a stronger case that we would do a better job by these authors than the big publishers would. And that's been proven true, not just for Graywolf, but really for quite a lot of small presses, I think, over the last 10 years.
Thank you. Steve, I have a question for you. So retailers such as Amazon have provided an environment in which millions of titles are for sale. Do you think that the current pace of publishing is sustainable? And do you think that self-publishing will continue to be as popular as it seems to be right now?
Did everyone hear the question?
No, let me repeat it. Retailers such as Amazon have provided an environment in which millions of titles are on sale. Do you think that the current pace of publishing is sustainable? And do you think that self-publishing will continue to be as popular as it seems to be right now?
Yes.
I agree.
Anyone have questions out there?
We will soon live in a world where everyone who thinks they have a book to write will be able to publish that book. That is to say, technology has democratized the means of production, and the internet has provided a means of distribution which is far more efficient and accessible than ever before in the whole of human history. By one measure, this is a great advance. By another measure, why is it that everything is getting dumber? The amount of time we live in a world which prizes velocity over the solitude and patience needed for actual reflection, which is to say, a kind of ecology that might produce something that would resemble wisdom, is ever scarcer in the world that we live in. I mean, when I first came to the Los Angeles Times as the literary editor of the paper, there was some, I forget what the figure was, but there was something on the order of, and here I'm slightly making up the figure, 100,000 or so hardcover trade books in 1996. A few years later, it was up to 200,000. Now you tell me it's 340. I sometimes think that no book, however mediocre, goes unpublished. And I often felt, as literary editor of the paper, that I felt what I imagined a First World War surgeon might have felt on the battlefield of Verdun. It was triage every day. The point was hardly that there were too many books. There are going to be many more books. One man, one woman, one vote, one book. I mean, we will all have books. The problem is the readers. Will there be the readers? I mean, we famously live in a world now where everyone is a poet, but where are the readers and buyers of the poetry? That is a shrinking band. So, you know, I think, and Amazon's dominance is cause for real concern. I can tell you, I don't think I'm revealing a trade secret. I mean, Yale University Press, and it is not alone in that, it is true of most of the presses, trade, and university, 2/3, 66% of our business today is through Amazon. That means that Amazon has the leverage to begin, as they have begun, to really dictate the terms of the trade. And for Amazon, books, which is where Jeff Bezos got his name, for a variety of reasons, books are a fraction, a very small part of what Amazon's business is today. And it is not all that important for them, except in a way for legacy, and because that Bezos understood that while all the books look sort of the same, like one's children sort of resemble each other, they're these square rectangular objects, but they are each different one from the other, and that the consumer profile that could be developed from the hoovering up of the information of those who purchased this title and that title, and the links that could be made and the profile that would emerge of their taste, it meant that you could develop a very significant base to which you might, from which you might sell other things to these people. So it provided a foundation for a behemoth that has now far exceeded what many people assumed would be the case when it began. And the implications for the book selling business are a source of some concern, but no one knows what to do about it, and no one now thinks they can really compete. After all, Bezos' own maxim when he started out was get big fast. He did.
Well, that's a perfect, thank you. That's a perfect lead into the next question I have for Mark Tauber. So the vast majority of books today are sold to readers by retailers. Some people in our industry feel that the publishing business doesn't have a readership problem as much as it might have a retail problem. As a result, many publishers are spending considerable energy connecting to their books' readers directly, and in some cases selling to them themselves versus rather than through retail. Do you think these efforts are going to be successful?
Good question. Yeah, I think you put it right there. I think that in my experience, Ethan could speak to this more maybe, but small to mid-sized publishers have done a great job over the years connecting directly with their readers, customers, if you will, consumers, buying direct, whether that in the old day be catalog. At the big houses, that was not the case. It was very much a retail model, and as you say, Mark, it remains that way. That is who we were trying to spend all our time wining and dining, sharing early galleys. A galley is a manuscript. It's an early version of the book. Doing everything that we could to say, here's the book you need to be excited about. That was all pretty much focused on retailers, whether that was the Barnes & Noble buyers in the various categories or, the various indie superstars at the different regional events that usually take place in the fall. One of the best ones takes place here, by the way, in the fall. It's interesting because we still have to be attentive to these folks, but more and more we now have to be appealing directly to readers, to consumers, and we just haven't been set up that way. I guess it returns to, for me, what I mentioned earlier, like we're just a big ship turning slowly. We didn't used to, it's not that we didn't care, it's just that it was, for us, the retailers wanted to take care of the end users, the readers. Now, we have to be very much in touch. I'll give you one example. We've had, it's really fun, at HarperCollins, we've started this thing called BookBub. Yeah. There's also another thing in the industry. It's called Book Perk. And these are essentially email lists, email subscription. We're Book Perk, sorry. BookBub is the one in the end. I'm looking to my associate publisher to be like, what the hell? What is it? But the point of these is that these didn't exist 2.5 years ago. These are email lists that have grown so quickly, and what they are, you can go there, all of you, and subscribe if you aren't already. And every single day, you get a very discounted ebook, right? So these are for you who are using the devices, right? Not the physical book. 99 cents, $2.99, $3.99. I mean, you're not going to find anything really more than $3.99. And these are incredible things. I mean, these are not just the sort of the bottom of the pile, if you will. These are big authors and big books. We've seen tremendous growth with this. And then what we've been able to do, of course, as a publisher, and this is, I think, to try and help answer the question is, we've been able to then take this data, who's buying what, analyze it and say, okay, well, maybe we should be sending them stuff when, Harper Lee writes her next book, we should be sending like-minded books. I mean, the point is we're doing what other big Valley companies have been doing for a while, and I think that's a very hopeful sign for the business because we're getting directly to, I'm sure all of you are readers, directly to you with hopefully more and more your likes, not having to have it be mediated by the Barnes & Nobles of the world. Is that fair?
And I wanted to ask Ethan the same question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, well, the interesting thing for us has been, after what was kind of an existentially dire moment 10 years ago for independent booksellers, we've seen a huge resurgence in the last 10 years. And actually just recently, and we have a really special guest in the audience, Paul Yamazaki, who's in the front row here, is one of the great booksellers in the country. He's been at City Lights Books for 40 years. And I don't think I told Paul, but our proportion of sales to independent booksellers has been going up steadily in the last couple of years. And it's been terrific to see. And it's become, as much as we do kind of try to have a presence online and on our website and talk to readers directly, we're still very happy to have the support for these stores around the country because we really can't get everywhere. And I think especially in urban areas, independent bookstores having a real resurgence now, and it's become, once again, it's stabilized and actually increasing. I think there's a young generation of booksellers now that has a lot of energy, who are under 40 and even under 30, who are not intimidated by the internet and aren't afraid of digital books, and are figuring out that people actually, in this volume of 350,000 books, people actually would like to be told which are the good ones. And that role is hugely important, and I think the independent stores are still playing that role. So what we do, the thing that's important to us in terms of direct-to-consumer stuff is actually really kind of getting the word out early about our books. You know, we do galley giveaways to people who follow us on Goodreads, and we try to just, you know, the people who know us, we want them to read our books early so that they tell other people about them. So publishing is a business where you have to talk to everybody. And, you know, we sell books through Amazon, we sell books through the independents, through the chains. And, you know, if Barnes & Noble fell apart, that would be a big deal for us.
So you're looking at connecting with the reader more as marketing rather than selling to them directly?
Generally,
you're
yeah.
Trying to drive them back into the retail environment when...
Absolutely, yeah, we do. We're still very supportive of the retail environment. We do sell books directly, and that's great, and we make a bigger percentage of it. We're not a retailer. You know, I mean, for publishers to learn how to be retailers is a whole new skill. And actually, it's one of the reasons that it's sort of these big boats moving so slowly is these publishers are not retailers. And so people like Paul and City Lights or Green Apple or wherever you happen to go buy your books, these people have been doing it for decades, and they're really good at it.
Right, great.
This is all getting a little too optimistic for me. The thing that sold books for centuries was bookstores. And there are some, you know, you can count them on two hands, great bookstores that have a wide range left in this country, such as City Lights. But in much of the country, you know, in San Francisco, I don't know, there must be 2 stores left. There are not many of stores that actually have a comprehensive range of new books for sale. I'm willing to debate this in a later panel with anybody they want. I've lived in the Bay Area for 15 years now, and I've seen the number of stores go down. They were, however imperfect they were, the mechanism for selling books. Publishers marketed books, but they did not sell them. And so, you know, I think publishers can learn that somewhat, and they have to learn it. What is actually going to sell material in a reasonably disinterested or you know, non-biased, above-board way? I think is still very much an open question, and that question will determine the fate of the literary culture, at least.
Steve, you
Yeah. One of the things that's happening more and more is authors and prospective authors are raising the question, what is it that publishers actually do for me that I can't do better for myself? And the truth of the matter is that publishers are institutionally, congenitally timid. They are deeply conservative. I don't mean politically necessarily, but they, on the whole, lack imagination. They're run by people who, if they could do something that would actually be more lucrative in life, they would have been doing that. Instead, they are washed up businessmen who can't really run a business. Yeah, I understand. Listen, there's a reason, and this has been true from time immemorial. The reason Homer was blind was to spare him the disobliging sight of any Athenian bookstore he happened to drop into to see if there were copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey on the table. And just as today, when I was earlier talking to David Thompson, who I represent with one hat, and published his last book with Yale University Press, Why Acting Matters, and he was supposed to have a signing immediately following. There were no books. Why was I embarrassed, even though it wasn't my responsibility to see that there were books there? There were no books for people to sign. over and over and again, publishers don't know how to edit books. They don't know how to publish them. They don't know how to cut through the noise of the culture and get attention. And for all the guff about having a platform, the truth of the matter is that more and more, the poor author has not only to be responsible for writing the goddamn thing, but has to be responsible for selling the books out of the back of his or her station wagon. Okay? And over the course of time, the entire role of the editor as gatekeeper and discriminating judgment has come under siege in our culture. I used to think that the internet and the great diversity of titles and all these people, that the role of the editor would become enhanced, that there would be a desire that someone of some expertise and discrimination and judgment would have a skill that would be more and more valued. Just the opposite has happened. More and more, the editor is considered to be an obstruction, an elitist who is exercising who gave them the authority to be a gatekeeper, saying you can come in but you can't come in, and the slings and arrows that have been thrown against the fortress of New York, which has stood in the minds of the perfervid imaginations of those who felt themselves to be disabused and unable to get across the drawbridge to Manhattan, has stood for what has happened in this country, which is the stigmata or the stigma of elitism has been pinned to the chest of the legacy publishers, and it is held in some considerable, the erosion of their authority has been palpable. And the technology has made it possible for people to make an end run around all these publishers.
Okay.
And many people think this is a great and wonderful thing.
Tell us the truth.
That's what you
now.
really think, yeah. Clearly, we have opinion in the audience, and we have opinion on the stage here. So I think I'm going to turn over and ask some questions here. Right here? Yell your question. Please stand up and yell it as loud as you can. We have a bunch of people. Yep.
Well, as an author, I thought my publisher did an amazing job with the editing and gave me a nice advance and did a great job with marketing and publicity for 3 weeks after the book came out. And so my question is, what can publishing do to not market books like events, but to market books like products, individual books, not a stream of books, but actually the book that we wrote? Because coming from a marketing background in Silicon Valley, you would not launch your product and then fire your marketing person after 4 weeks.
Is the question, how can a publisher that publishes my book look at my book as an individual book that needs to be marketed versus part of a broader marketing scheme?
Not marketed as an event, but as a product that has a life cycle.
Got it.
Like a year.
And we want to grab that on the crowd here.
Go ahead, Ethan.
Here.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's tricky because if media around your book is incredibly dispersed over the course of a year, actually there's not enough sort of noise for people to even notice it. So in a way, you're kind of forced to try to get all of your publicity at once. I think one of the ways is probably for publishers to publish fewer books so they don't feel so compelled to move on to the next one. That, of course, comes with an attendant frustration that if we publish fewer books, there are more of you who still want to publish them, and we say no even more often. But I think that's often to the good. I think one of the things that's been working for us is trying to publish books for more than a month. One of the problems is that places like Barnes & Noble in particular, if a book has stopped selling after 6 weeks, they'll start returning them to us. So how can we get them to stop? So I don't know if everybody knows, but books are returnable. So that bookstores don't take any real risk. Barnes & Noble can buy 4,000 copies of a book. And if they sell 1,000, they're sending 3,000 back to us, and we eat it. So it's a stupid business, but it's the business, David wants to jump in.
I just want to say that if you got 3 or 4 weeks out of your publisher, you're probably lucky. I talked to a major publisher in New York recently, and they said if nothing happens in the first week, they cut the book loose. And she gave me an example of an author who was sick that week, and it's well, when can we start up my public? Nope, not going to happen. And actually, I think in that case, canceled the paperback as well. So it is a brutal system.
So now it's time for the big publisher to speak up, right? All right. Thanks, guys, disgruntled authors and all. Listen, I think that your question is spot on. We are in the trade publishing houses. There are 4 of them now. Really, we call them the big 4. Frankly, the first one, Penguin Random House, is essentially almost annual revenue equal to the other 3. It's a massive corporation business. Who are you published by? Okay. It's a hits-driven business. There is no question about it. In our world, it is a hits-driven business. If your book, and it is the case that we know not only, forget that, David, first week, we know first day whether a book is working. Now, but before you get tis about this, I'm going to counter what he's saying. The issue is not that we give up. We actually watch the books, but the books we buy are tiered, right? We have A book, B book, and C book levels roughly. A big book for us, there's no way we're going to give up on in the first few weeks. Having said that, if a C book or a B book or an A book starts to take off, guess what? We follow it. Do we drop? I mean, I think the language of cutting all support's a little strong. I mean, I am a publisher, but I think that's a little bit strong. I think that we continue to support it far better than self-publishing would, and I could argue that we have 27 different departments working, at least 27 different departments working on a book that you don't have as self-publishing, you could go out and hire. The fact of the matter is, it is a hits-driven business. So if a book starts to work, we're gonna follow it. If it doesn't work, it is gonna fall a little bit down the chain. I mean, look, I'm not going to be dishonest about that. That's the way it goes. Do we give up? I would say no. And by the way, my company is known for its backlist. And that means that books come around again and again and again. And I would say, on a very hopeful note, with ebooks, every single book is now a book forever. It's bullshit to say in the old days that these books lived forever. You know what? They didn't. They weren't in Clean Well Lighted. You know, they weren't in the stores after a few years. Now, at the touch of a few buttons, every single book, no matter how old it is available to you. And those books keep coming back over and over again.
I'm going to try to squeeze one more question. Back here.
Mike Larson, I started with William Morrow, 67, age of 40 years, Rex San Francisco Writers Conference. We're going to go on to 11 books. I'm astonished at what I haven't heard here today. Okay, first of all, writing, publishing, book selling, agency, putting out a conference, all labors of love. If you start becoming a writer without that in mind, you're nuts. Second of all, the publishing industry is turned upside down now because of the disruption of technology. The real critics and curators now are readers. That's not the bad news. If a book's good enough, it'll find its way, it will succeed, it cannot not succeed. So readers are the new curators and critics. That's not the bad news through social media. Okay? So writers have to take, writers have to take, no, writers have to take, writers have to take the long view about publishing. It takes 5 books to develop a career. That's what Don Moss said, okay? Just like there's no one-hit wonders. To build a career, publishing can't do enough for you. You have to do it yourself by creating communities of people that help.
Michael, let somebody ask a question.
All right. Last question right here. Sorry. Loud, please.
Role of libraries in distributing books.
Question is, what's the role of libraries in distributing books?
Well, for a university press like Yale, the role of libraries had been very crucial. And there were once X thousands of libraries, and you could pretty well assume that publication of a decent work of history would be supported by the assured sale. That market is virtually gone now. Libraries have shuttered their doors. They've consolidated their businesses. College libraries are cooperating with each other, so they have lending libraries. They're buying, not each branch is buying, like UC System. They don't buy for each of the 11 campuses now. They buy 1 or 2, and they're lending and circulating around. The library market is has taken a tremendous hit, and it's cause for a serious concern.
I'm going to have to say that's the last word. Thank you so much for all coming out.